First up is Wolverine vs. the Hulk. Talk about making an entrance. The Canadian superhero burst onto the scene on his home turf in issue 181 of the Incredible Hulk comic books. Wolverine was working for the Canadian federal government at the time and ended up having to jump into a fight between Hulk and the Wendigo. This was truly a clash of the titans, and the Wolverine proved to the world that he could hold his own. He ended up taking on both characters before he eventually sided with Hulk, and the pair worked together to take down Wendigo. It's nothing new for Marvel heroes to fight each other when they first meet, but this one hit a little heavier than usual. There was quite a bit of tension between Wolverine and Hulk for a very long time. There's always a feeling that neither one of them actually got over it. Whatever the case though, it was still the perfect way for Wolverine to announce his arrival and put the Hulk on notice. Up next, Wolverine tosses Deadpool. Well, we already know these two have had some wild rides together. The relationship between Wolverine and Deadpool can simply be described as complicated. Although they have fought alongside each other on numerous occasions, they've also had plenty of situations that have turned sour. Back in 2009's Hulk vs. Wolverine, the Canadian government tasked their hero with tracking down the Green Giant. The only problem was that Team X, which included Wolverine's old buddy Deadpool, managed to capture him. Although Deadpool had his usual basket of witty insults prepared, Wolverine got the last laugh when he tossed the foul-mouthed hero into a revived Hulk. To add even more insult to injury, the Green Giant then smashed Deadpool into a wall. It might not have been an electric fight on this occasion, but Wolverine definitely got the last laugh. Next up is Wolverine vs. Captain America. These two have had an up and down relationship over the years, but things really got interesting in the third issue of Avengers vs. X-Men. It's obvious that the two sides had very different opinions on certain topics, and this boiled over into a hard-fought battle over the Phoenix Force. Wolverine had informed the Avengers that Cyclops did not have good intentions for the Phoenix Force and was ready to kickstart the war. Captain America, however, was not buying what Wolverine was selling and began to have doubts about the X-Men. The two heroes eventually came to blows, and Wolverine actually did much better than most people might have assumed. He was really giving Captain America a run for his money until Giant Man stepped in and hammered Wolverine from behind. Wolverine might have lost this one, but it was only because Captain America needed some outside help to win. After that, we have Wolverine vs. Spider-Man. If you want to talk about epic showdowns, then this one is definitely near the top of the list. Wolverine and Spider-Man were both placed in Berlin during the Cold War for two very different reasons. Spider-Man was on assignment as a photographer, but Wolverine was actually trying to help a spy who also happened to be an ex-girlfriend of his. The spy wanted Wolverine to put her out of her misery, as the Germans and the Soviets were both on her tail, but Spider-Man did not want this to happen. He wanted to bring the elusive spy to justice, and this ultimately meant that he would have to fight Wolverine. The two had a spirited tilt, and although Wolverine didn't come out with W on this occasion, his tremendous skills ultimately got him exactly what he wanted. Spider-Man's rage had risen to new levels, and he ended up striking the spy with a lethal punch, which of course is what Wolverine set out to do in the first place. Up next is Wolverine vs. North Star. Enemy of the State was a pretty wild time in the life of Wolverine. This story saw the Canadian hero lured to Japan, where he was eliminated by Gorgon, only to be resurrected as a powerful slave of an evil ninja syndicate. He then worked as a soldier for the Hand and Hydra Alliance and attacked pretty much everyone in sight. Enemy of the State includes some memorable battles with Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and many more. But Wolverine's biggest statement from all of these fights was his battle against his fellow Canadian, North Star. Wolverine came out of this fight as the only surviving hero, but his crazed rampage was finally put to a stop by the rest of the X-Men. Who knows how many more he could have taken down had the X-Men not intercepted him. Our next fight takes us back to Wolverine vs. Deadpool. On this occasion, Wolverine actually managed to take his acquaintance's head off with his razor-sharp claws. This all occurred in the 44th issue of Cable and Deadpool, when the foul-mouthed hero went solo to try and save Weasel from Hydra. This unfortunately meant that he was going to cross paths with Wolverine, who had been tasked with taking out the Hydra base's section commander. Of course, that commander happens to be Weasel, and the conflicting jobs ended up resulting in another fight between the two heroes. Unfortunately for Deadpool, Wolverine took a quick swipe at his frenemy's head and managed to clear it right off of his shoulders. While this would have been the end of pretty much anyone, Deadpool's special abilities only called for his head to be stuck back onto his neck so he could return to normal. Next on our list is Wolverine vs. Cyclops. This was a spirited tilt that included many years of built-up rage. Now, to say things have been rocky between these two heroes over the years would be the ultimate understatement. It's no secret that Wolverine and Cyclops never saw eye to eye on many things, but it rarely ever boiled over into violence. That is until Cyclops decided to send a young mutant to eliminate a group of Hellfire Club goons. This decision sent Wolverine over the edge, as he couldn't understand why Cyclops would send such a young person to commit this terrible crime. The two exchanged verbal jabs before they finally let their fists do the talking and kicked off one of the craziest fights we've ever seen. A Sentinel eventually showed up to put a stop to this rage-filled battle, so there really was no definitive winner. The intense fight did, however, remind everybody that Wolverine meant business. Now we have Demon Wolverine versus the X-Men. The Canadian superhero was dragged into hell on multiple occasions, but his demon-possessed fight against his X-Men buddies was one for the ages. The Red Right Hand summoned Logan to the underworld and Logan goes to hell, only for his body to be completely taken over by a demonic entity. This demon was hell-bent, pun intended, on tracking down the rest of the X-Men and eliminating them with one of their own allies. While the real Wolverine was doing his best to escape from the underworld, his possessed body took on the X-Men in a battle for the ages. Although it wasn't technically Wolverine himself, this is still one of the hero's most memorable fights. The demon made good use of the body while it was in control, and showed off the tremendous power that Wolverine is actually capable of. Now thankfully the X-Men managed to put a stop to their evil friend, but this was one battle that we will never forget. Up next is the Deadpool fight from Wolverine Origins. There is absolutely no shortage of conflicts between these guys who always seem to be brought together by fate. While Deadpool was on a mission to eliminate his old pal Wolverine, turns out there was an unexpected twist that led him to this situation. Deadpool was hilariously using all sorts of cartoon attack methods to eliminate Wolverine, such as dropping a piano on his head, but nothing seemed to work. After many tense battles and verbal tirades, the two heroes eventually got serious and discovered a little more about why they were in this situation. As it turns out, Wolverine was actually the one who hired Deadpool in the first place to eliminate himself. He did this to lure Daken out of hiding. This of course meant that Wolverine was able to use Deadpool to get the last laugh and ensure that he got exactly what he wanted. It also must have stung Deadpool pretty bad that he was unable to complete his task of eliminating Wolverine. And finally we have Wolverine vs. the Grey Hulk. Logan came to blows with his longtime enemy once again for one of the most memorable fights in Marvel's history. In issue 340 of The Incredible Hulk, Wolverine decides to take matters into his own hands while Grey Hulk is on a rampage. He jumps into another battle with the Raging Giant to put an end to the Smash Fest, and both heroes really gave it everything they had. There was plenty of back and forth and lots of destruction, and Wolverine actually managed to push Grey Hulk to the brink. It probably would have been over against almost any other hero, but Hulk's healing abilities allowed him to make a comeback and get the final decision in this fight. Although Wolverine might have lost in the end, he was able to taste a bit of victory against one of his toughest opponents. This also put the Hulk on notice that his enemy was stronger than he might have originally thought.
Wolverine has taken on many names: Wolverine, Logan, James, Weapon X, and yet no matter where life takes him, he doesn't know peace. Wolverine's life has literally never been easy, not even from day one. He was a child born out of wedlock, and his mom didn't really care for him. In fact, she wasn't around much as she was institutionalized after Wolverine's half-brother died. His biological father, Thomas Logan, wasn't a good person, nor was his other half-brother, Dog Logan. His maternal grandfather was extremely abusive. The only good thing in his life at this point was his friend Rose and John Howlett, his stepfather. But Wolverine is a superhero, which means nothing good ever lasts long. Thomas and Dog killed Wolverine's puppy, leading them to get expelled from the estate. But Thomas did not have it in him to go with Grace. He got drunk and broke into the Howlett mansion with a shotgun. John Howlett tried to protect his wife but was taken out by Thomas. Young Wolverine witnessed this firsthand, and this was what triggered his mutant abilities for the first time. His claws scarred Dog's face and were the last thing Thomas saw. Wolverine's mother, now terrified, cast him out. The entire ordeal caused so much stress to her already frail mental state, she too ended her life with Thomas's shotgun. Rose fled with Wolverine to BC, where the two did get to experience peace for a bit. Wolverine though has the privilege of a healing factor which saves him at least once or twice every storyline. This healing factor is useful, but it can also give him partial amnesia. Traumatic events alter your brain chemistry, so his healing factor patches that up, meaning that he will forget the hard stuff. Rose later died in Logan's arms after a fight went sideways, so he's off to a great start. Wolverine has had quite a long list of ill-fated romances, but he made it as far as an actual wedding with love interest Mariko Yashida. The two fell in love when she visited him in New York, but it wasn't meant to be as she was already betrothed. Wolverine ended up dueling her father, leader of criminal organization Clan Yashida, for her hand. He lost, but it's the thought that counts. They did duel a second time and Wolverine won that one, and then Wolverine and her were engaged shortly after. Invites were sent out to Wolverine's teammates. Unfortunately, after After the X-Men super guests arrived, they were all poisoned by some tea from crime lord Viper. She was also working with the Silver Samurai, who is also Marioko's half-brother. The X-Men are taken to the hospital in critical condition, except for Wolverine, because of his healing factor. The Silver Samurai and Viper send Wolverine on a wild goose chase to get him away from the hospital so they can take out the vulnerable X-Men. Wolverine does make it back in time to save the X-Men. He nearly ends the Silver Samurai, but Viper teleports them out of there. The X-Men all recover and everyone is wedding ready. But Marioko calls it off. The reason? Apparently she no longer thought Wolverine was worthy. We later learn she was just being mind controlled. Doesn't cancel out the heartbreak Wolverine experienced, and we even get to see Wolverine cry in the final panel. Wolverine has been a part of some pretty major historical events, both World Wars, the Prohibition era, and even the Valentine's Day Massacre. This event is a real thing that happened in 1920 Chicago. In our world, there were no survivors from this horrible day, but in the MCU, Wolverine was the only man to make it out alive. Wolverine, now going by Logan, got into some hot water with Al Capone as Capone controlled Chicago's gang scene, and thus anything illegal coming through, like for example the alcohol Logan was smuggling into the US with his girlfriend. Leading up to Valentine's Day, there were a few fights between Logan and Capone's men, leading to many casualties, including Logan's girlfriend. Her death was what drove Logan to find the famous mob boss. Capone denied having a hand in Logan's girlfriend's death and sent him to the person that did. But surprise, it was just a setup to get Logan to the site of the Valentine's Day Massacre. He almost doesn't make it out, but his healing factor has his back. Wolverine has been captured way too many times to count. This time, he was being tracked by recurring enemy Victor Creed. Victor found Wolverine unconscious in the middle of a murder scene and snatched him away before the authorities arrived. He took him to the Ravencroft Institute so that scientist Nathaniel Essex could experiment on him. The experiments included a lobotomy, which led to a coma, and a loss of his left arm. To recap, at this point Wolverine has gone from accused of crimes he didn't commit, to kidnapped, to lobotomized, to having his arm cut off. Not a good week so far. One of the doctors, Claudia Russell, freed Wolverine, who is now out of his coma due to his healing factor. The pair was confronted by Victor Creed, and Claudia knew that Wolverine couldn't take a fight with Creed in his state, so she sent him away facing Victor herself. This was a more evenly matched fight than you'd think. Turns out Claudia was a werewolf, and she was the one committing the crimes. She didn't win the fight, but it was enough for Wolverine to get away. It's unclear how his arm came back, but if I had to guess, it was probably the healing factor. It's pretty rare that Wolverine ever fully dies, but one way that has been confirmed to finish the job is drowning. The healing factor requires oxygen, so take that away and Wolverine is done for. It's a fact that has been confirmed in Uncanny X-Force 33 and Wolverine Black, White, and Blood issue 4. The serious drowning situation in Uncanny X-Force involved Wolverine, a student of his Evan, and Wolverine's son Daken. Daken has hated Wolverine since he was abandoned by him. Wolverine didn't even know he was born. But Daken is still set on causing Wolverine's demise and doing so while Wolverine watches one of his students get attacked. It's not cute. Eventually though, Wolverine does get saved and he and his son fight it out. His son loses the match after Wolverine holds him face down in a shallow puddle. In Black, White, and Blood, Wolverine finds himself in shark-infested waters. He is clearly very set on not drowning, admitting that if he were to pass out from blood loss and sink to the bottom of the ocean, his healing factor would bring him back, just for him to drown again in a continuous, horrifying loop. Until a miracle occurs, of course, and someone drags him above ground. This is one of the only confirmed ways to permanently end Wolverine. Another major historical event Logan had the displeasure of experiencing was the bombing of Hiroshima. I am not kidding. During the Second World War, Logan is captured by soldiers in Japan. He gets his usual treatment of being put in a local prison. He eventually escapes beside Lieutenant Ethan Warren, who will soon become a problem. Logan finds a place to relax for a while with a local girl and they fall in love, but again, good things can't last for him and Lieutenant Warren reappears. The mutant fights Logan's lover, who is a talented swordswoman, but eventually overpowers and ends her. This brings Logan into the fight, but as the two are pummeling each other, a plane is soon overheard overhead. The plane that is carrying the atomic bomb. It destroys the city and injures the two men. Logan's healing factor is working overtime as it now has to regenerate Logan's entire outer skin layer and half his insides. He looks bad. bad, y'all. At this point, two things are consistent for Wolverine. He will be pummeled to near death, and his healing factor will ensure that he suffers another day. This was taken to the extreme in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 11. In this comic, Wolverine actually does die. It's a pretty serious fight with the powerful being Horde. Horde wants the Crystal of Ultimate Vision and tasks the X-Men with getting it for him. He wants it because the crystal has life-sustaining powers and grants complete understanding of the universe to whoever uses it. Towards the end of the comic, Wolverine and Horde are battling it out. Wolverine perishes due to a spear to the back, and Horde resolves to take part of Wolverine as his prize. This is ultimately his undoing. Through this action, a drop of Wolverine's blood gets on the crystal, and the power of it literally regenerates Wolverine's being. Normally, his healing factor would not be capable of bringing him back from just a drop of blood. It was the crystal that gave it a power boost, kind of like a Wolverine jump cable. He has the crystal's power flowing through him at this point and uses that to defeat Horde. At this point, Wolverine is basically a god, meaning he can feel every part of the universe and even manipulate it to his will. But the man does have a conscience and realizes that no one should have this level of power. The crystal is now deemed as a threat to the universe and is destroyed by Wolverine, and he lives to suffer another day. Wolverine famously has a thing for Jean Grey. This has led to a lot of emotional and physical pain over the years. New X-Men issue 148 really wanted to destroy this man. Wolverine and Jean Grey are lured to Asteroid M, old headquarters mutant enemy number 1, Magneto. We find that Magneto has spent the last little while creating a plan to destroy the X-Men by preying on their weaknesses. For Wolverine and Jean, they are trapped on this asteroid that is slowly heading towards the sun. The heat and dwindling oxygen make it increasingly difficult for Grey to function, causing her to slowly die. Just before the two enter the sun, Wolverine mercy kills Grey so she won't have to experience being burned up. Wolverine does get to experience this though, as he walks the two of them straight into it. What he doesn't know is that killing her and walking into the sun triggered the Phoenix, which Jean is then able to use to save the pair and transport them down to Earth just in time to save the day. Unfortunately, Wolverine lost her for real in the end, as Magneto shocked her with an extreme amount of power. Wolverine, now feral, ended Magneto right then and there, so Wolverine has to deal with the pain of losing her again, twice, once at his own hand, and is now one of the only few who knows what it's like to be burned up by the sun. In the same issue, we learn that Wolverine was once trapped under a glacier for 6 months. That's already awful. It gets worse because glaciers don't have much to eat in or around or under them, meaning that Wolverine got creative with his healing factor, using it to regrow his skin whenever his hunger took a piece off. He is likely also stuck in a constant state of all-over regeneration for this period. His healing factor is forced to not only regenerate his arm, but also any skin that is being damaged by frostbite, making him immune to the effects of it. It is currently unclear how Wolverine got under the iceberg or how he got out. The Old Man Logan storyline has a reputation for being one of the most heartbreaking Wolverine series. For good reason. One particularly famous moment happened in Wolverine Volume 3, number 70. At this point, America is divided into sections belonging to various villains and villain races. An elderly Logan and Hawkeye, they must travel across this chaotic, now wasteland, to deliver an important parcel. They have to pass the time somehow, and Wolverine chooses to do so by telling Hawkeye about the day he decided to retract his claws for good. In the evening, the X-Mansion suddenly receives dozens of distress calls before being attacked by a group of powerful supervillains. Wolverine desperately tries evacuating all the students while simultaneously fighting. He slowly works his way through every villain until it's just him and Bullseye. But Bullseye's last words are what flips this all on its head. He asks Logan, "Why are you doing this? You're supposed to be our friend." Turns out, Logan wasn't attacking supervillains, but instead his own teammates and friends. Actual supervillain Mysterio appeared after the carnage was over, revealing the true scene to Logan. Logan was extremely distressed and heartbroken by what he did, and spent the next few weeks wandering the forest until finally stopping on some train tracks to end Wolverine once and for all.
Kicking us off today is Marvel's Civil War event. This whole event kicked off because of a guy named Nitro. This villain has the power to explode, and when he did this, hopped up on a new substance, he wiped out the entire town of Stamford, Connecticut. This split the entire superhuman community down the middle, with Tony Stark leading half of them under the idea of superhuman registration, and Captain America leading the other half who opposed this. Wolverine partnered up with the former, and he was given a very specific task. task: to track down Nitro and bring him to justice. But when Wolverine actually managed to track the guy down, the villain did what he does best: explode. And when it happened here, he managed to completely incinerate Wolverine down to his shiny adamantium bones. But speaking of Wolverine's shiny bones, they did in fact lose their luster at one point, and that was more than brutal enough for this list. In the 1993 crossover event Fatal Attractions, Magneto was offering mutants sanctuary on his ship, the Avalon, and recovering from the legacy virus he was planning to completely wipe out humanity, being opposed only by the X-Men. Xavier, in a special Shi'ar suit, leads the fight against Magneto on Avalon, and Magneto holds everyone off until Wolverine gets the drop on him. Wolverine makes it really close, slicing Magneto across the chest just a little bit too close for comfort, and this pushes Magneto over the edge. He basically turns the adamantium on Wolverine's skeleton into liquid and quite literally pulls it out of his body. It's gruesome. But there is actually more than one character to take on the Wolverine name. X-23's origin story was told in the 2004 miniseries X-23 Innocence Lost, which takes Laura Kinney from conception to independence, and man does she go through the ringer. Laura, unlike most of the other mutants, was created in a lab. This lab was called the Facility, and it's where attempts were being made to clone Wolverine/Weapon X from a recovered sample of his own DNA. The problem is that the sample was incomplete, resulting in constant failures. It was the work of a brilliant geneticist named Sarah Kinney that finally made the project a success when she combined her own DNA with that of the sample to create a genetic replica with near identical powers to the original Wolverine. This clone became labeled X-23, but Sarah secretly named her Laura. X-23 was trained from birth to be an assassin, treated fairly extremely and exposed to a trigger scent that would cause her to lose all control and give in to a brutal rage. The organization used this trigger scent to have her wipe out her sensei, as well as to make money off of her as an 11-year-old super assassin. Now eventually her mother, for lack of a better term, realized that she needed to free Laura. Plus, she also learned that the facility was creating more clones, intending to train them in the same way, and she decided that she needed to take them all out. Thanks to Sarah, X-23 managed to destroy the facility and the clones, but as she escaped, she discovers that the facility have put the trigger scent on her own mother. Sarah ends up being taken out by Laura herself, passing away in her arms before X-23 finally gets to escape. But if we really want to dive into the brutality of Wolverine, we can look directly at Weapon X. A large chunk of Wolverine's life was spent being forced to work for the ultra-shady government group known as Weapons Plus/Weapon X. They are the ones that gave Wolverine those shiny adamantium bones that we talked about at the beginning of the list. Not only did they force Wolverine and many others into nasty experiments to create super soldiers, they then hired out those super soldiers to the highest bidders, brainwashing these people into committing terrible atrocities. For example, Wolverine was forced to steal a boy named Frank Simpson and begin programming him to turn him into an enhanced killer. But then later on in life, Wolverine came across Frank in Vietnam as a soldier, and their interaction was anything but pleasant. Wolverine basically put Frank through the ringer, physically and psychologically breaking him to the point that Frank became a killer and started going by the name Nuke, which is when he became a Daredevil villain. Now, while Wolverine spent time on the X-Men team, he came into contact with one Dr. Hank McCoy, aka Beast. Hank is one of the 8 smartest people in the world, and being smart in comic books seems to be a pretty easy path to being morally dubious. Don't get me wrong though, Wolverine is not a Boy Scout by any stretch of the imagination, but he still holds on to his morals, for the most part. Wolverine and Beast were actually friends, and Beast stuck with Wolverine during the Schism event, and he was also on the side of the Avengers with Wolverine during the Avengers vs. X-Men event. But people change, and Beast is absolutely one of those people. In order to deal with external threats to the new mutant nation of Krakoa, Beast has taken a position as the chief of the intelligence agency X-Force, which has almost completely cost him his morality. McCoy has chosen some questionably authoritarian actions to guarantee the Krakoa Krakoan sovereignty, like sabotaging the country of Terra Verde, squirreling away funds to open a space station prison, and interrupting one of Wolverine's resurrections to attach an obedience collar to send him on clandestine missions, all of which was kept secret from the rest of X-Force and the rest of the mutants. This ticked off Wolverine, which in turn ticked off Beast even more. He sent Wolverine on a mission so that he would be captured for an auction that Hank attended, and then he literally showed Wolverine to the afterlife in order to resurrect Logan again in a primitive state and turn him into Weapon X, where Beast sent him on more and more missions. Beast cloned Wolverine, and he used those clones as his own personal bodyguards and hitmen, and man, Beast has just become straight up a villain. No other way to put it. But Beast is nowhere near the most brutal villain that Wolverine has had to face. The Wolverine villain known as Cyber, for example, is one of the only villains to actually terrify Wolverine. With some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. And he's like 9 feet tall. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have his adamantium bones because Magneto took them away. So when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little more than disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon just goes off in the distance, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half, very much like Sabretooth did in Wolverine Origins, like the movie. That event scarred Wolverine, but right after, it made him even question his ability to be a hero in the first place. But moving on from that, the Thing is one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, able to stand toe-to-toe with the Hulk in battle. He and Wolverine have had their scrapes, and most of the time, Logan's been on the losing side. In one little altercation taking place in Fantastic Four 1961, issue 374, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Professor Hulk, and Spider-Man, who had previously taken the place of the Fantastic Four, were hunting for Johnny Storm, who had accidentally destroyed part of Empire State University. Now this led to an altercation between the four heroes and the Fantastic Four, but when Wolverine went to attack Susan Storm, Ben Grimm grabbed the Canadian and slammed him into the ground, calling him an arrogant little creep, because that's just what he does. But Wolverine, in his rage, used all of his might and he slashed Ben across the face, disfiguring the character in a huge way. Now the Thing got his payback as he yelled, "You frickin' little psycho," and then he whacks Wolverine with one punch, sending him flying through a bunch of buildings, but this actually scarred the Thing so bad that it had lasting effects throughout the comics. The post-apocalyptic world featured in the Old Man Logan storyline is one of the best things that Marvel has given us. But it's also one of the most brutal settings they've ever created. It all came to be when the villains decided that instead of fighting their usual villains, who they always lose to, they would instead put themselves up against whatever hero they were actually best suited to face. Now in the case of Wolverine, who is the main character here, that happened to be Mysterio. Mysterio is a master of creating illusions that trick even the senses, and he is almost always defeated by Spider-Man because of his spider sense. But for Logan, his super senses are one of his key traits, so when Mysterio uses his illusions to trick those senses into believing that the X-Mansion was being attacked by Doc Ock, Ulysses Klaue, Strife, and a whole squad of powerful villains, Wolverine believed it wholeheartedly and he held nothing back. Using his claws, he cut through the villains like butter. With all the other X-Men nowhere to be found, it was Wolverine versus everyone, and he was taking 40 different villains to the grave. It was insane. When he finally took down the last one, who was Bullseye, the illusion actually lifted to reveal that these villains were in actuality all his fellow X-Men, who were just caught completely off guard by the sudden attack from one of their own. Now there are a few different characters who often appear in the Wolverine circle, the Wolverine family, you could call them if you wanted to, but if we are counting down a list of brutal moments for the character, then there is one person in particular who needs to be talked about, and his name is Sabretooth. Sabretooth. Victor Creed seems to be bad simply because he enjoys it. As a kid, he took the life of his older brother Luther over a piece of pie, and was absolutely ruthless to his younger brother Saul, who he would make a habit of putting a beat down on, particularly on Saul's birthday. When his mutant powers manifested, it only made bringing harm to others even easier for him, and he eventually took out his own father before going on a rampage through 3 Canadian provinces at just 13 years old. He would become a bit of a wanderer throughout his life, moving from different careers that allowed him to take advantage of his power in order to spill more blood. Now, he eventually turned his savagery towards Wolverine, who happened to have taken the life of Saul, Sabretooth's younger brother. Sabretooth, in a really sick way, replaced Saul with Wolverine, making it his goal to make Wolverine's life a living hell. On every one of Wolverine's birthdays, he would beat Wolverine to within an inch of his life, and anyone Wolverine welcomed into his life, like those he would fall in love with, also became Victor's newest victims. And speaking of that, Sabretooth doesn't only try to ruin Wolverine's life on his birthdays. Anyone in Wolverine's life can become a target for Sabretooth, and Daken was Wolverine's son, born from Logan's marriage to a woman named Itsu, and the boy inherited his father's mutant abilities, but none of his morality. So, in an attempt to gain revenge on his father, Daken teamed up with Sabretooth and the group known as the Red Right Hand, and the group's battle with X-Force culminated in Logan having to take the life of his own son. But with the powers of Wolverine, this is obviously no easy feat. Most people believe Wolverine is practically unkillable, but this is actually not entirely true. He does have 1 or 2 foolproof ways to bring him down, and one of them is water. With Daken leaving his pops no choice, Wolverine is kind of forced to hold his son face down in a puddle until he stops breathing. This moment is intercut with these flash imaginations that Wolverine is having of the life that they could have possibly shared together if things were a bit more normal. Now, just as Daken takes his final breath and Logan mournfully is holding his son, Sabretooth appears on the scene, revealing that this has been his intention since he first partnered with Daken. Needless to say, we kinda hate Sabretooth here. Kicking off the list at number 10 is the Hulk. The first rivalry Wolverine ever had in comic book history is with the Incredible Hulk. The Hulk is basically just a ball of increasingly strong muscle, and he just gets more and more strong the longer the fight goes on and the more mad he gets. He can dish out basically untold amounts of damage. As for Wolverine though, he can take untold amounts of damage, almost always coming back thanks to his incredible healing factor. Their rivalry began with the Incredible Hulk number 181, when Wolverine was first introduced to comics, coming in between the Hulk and Wendigo. Then in the Incredible Hulk number 340, Wolverine takes on the Grey Hulk, going into a berserker rage, ripping into the Hulk like never before. It's awesome to see, that is, until the Hulk heals and makes Wolverine one with the ground. Then there was World War Hulk X-Men, and I mean, it's World War Hulk. Wolverine gets completely hogwashed here. There was also Savage Wolverine number 5, when the Hulk and Wolverine randomly encounter each other in the Savage Land, and Wolverine actually takes the win here, using his claws to give Hulk one hell of a headache, before the Hulk comes to, and then gets eaten by a big old fish. And that's just regular Wolverine and Hulk. These two have had so many encounters throughout the multiverse, we could probably do a whole video on just that. Number 9, Cyclops. Wolverine has had quite the luck with the ladies over his incredibly long history, but despite that, he couldn't seem to let one girl go. That girl was Jean Grey. Jean Grey has pretty consistently declined the advances of our short temperamental Canadian in favor of her boo, Scott Summers, the consistent leader of the X-Men, Cyclops. They just make for a better couple despite Scott kind of being the worst all the time. And Wolverine? He just can't stand that fact. He is pretty consistent, even to the point of being problematic with his advances towards Jean, despite her constant rejections. But Cyclops is not a pushover. He is a pretty strong-willed leader and not someone who takes behavior like Wolverine's lightly, which has led to many clashes between the two over the years. The pretty immature rivalry over their teammate, which has gotten bloody on way too many occasions, starts as a basis, but over their history, these two have butted heads over more important things. For example, there was a pretty serious difference of opinion in how the X-Men and the students of the school they are an integral part of should be led, causing the Schism story. Or there was the whole X-Men vs Avengers thing. More recently though, the three mutants seem to be in some kind of weird throuple, so that's interesting. Number 8,
The Thing. When thinking of characters who have a rivalry, I think The Thing often gets forgotten about. Everyone knows The Thing is a big old softie underneath his incredibly powerful exterior. But he and Wolverine? While these two do get along for the most part, they've got some history. During a fight that broke out between the two in Fantastic Four number 374, Wolverine lost control going into a bit of a rage, and he slashed Ben across the face with his adamantium claws. Normally, The Thing's rocky exterior can tank most damage, but adamantium is the strongest natural metal in the Marvel universe, so this attack from Wolverine actually did quite a bit of damage, disfiguring the face of The Thing. The Thing is already conscious of the fact that he has a rather monstrous look, but despite that, he still felt the need to hide his injury to his face, along with the fact that he needed to protect it in order for it to heal. So to do both of those things, he was forced to wear a helmet while he recovered. It was a whole thing. He continued wearing the Doctor Doom-like helmet until Fantastic Four number 385, when it finally healed, and in Fantastic Four number 395, The Thing even forgave Wolverine and the heroes began to move past it. But you never really forget someone who disfigured you. I wouldn't know, but you never do. Number 7, Namor. If there's one thing Wolverine hates, it's probably when someone has a bigger ego than he does. And Namor, the king of Atlantis in the Marvel Universe, is one such person with one hell of an ego. Most of the time, he is just a smug jerk who is trying to put us all under the ocean. Other times, he's one of the hardest hitting teammates to have on your side. Namor plays it pretty fast and loose with the whole allegiance thing, and that's mainly because his allegiance is to Atlantis over almost anything else. Wolverine just ain't a fan of this guy, and as such, Namor ain't a fan of him either. Putting two guys with massive egos in close proximity to each other is never really a good idea. Fortunately for Logan though, I think Namor is still the more powerful of the pair. Fight me in the comments. Number 6, Punisher. My whole reason for this point on this list comes from one fight in 2 issues of a comic. In the early 2000s, Punisher faced off with Wolverine in Punisher number 16 and 17. Essentially, the Punisher found himself in the crosshairs of Logan when he needed to buy himself some time without Wolverine getting in his way. To do this, Punisher blows off Wolverine's face with a bit of buckshot in Punisher number 16. Thanks to his insane abilities though, Logan is still standing with his face already starting to heal over his exposed adamantium skull. So, obviously, that didn't buy the Punisher much time at all. Instead, in Punisher number 17, Frank Castle makes things just a little bit more below the belt. Literally, as he wiped Wolverine's gonads off of the playing field in a similar way to how he took off Wolverine's face. But of course, even this won't stop the mutants, so Frank Castle resorts to even more drastic measures. Needing the means to give himself a day or two before Logan will start coming after him again, the Punisher decides to use a steamroller to slowly but completely flatten Logan. And that's all I got. Number 5, Emma Frost. Wolverine and Emma Frost have been through plenty of tough times together. Being both mutants, they do have a lot in common and understand each other's struggles. Hell, they're both heroes with some questionable past, so of course they can relate to each other. But Emma was still originally a villain, and she has often been a rival to Jean Grey, making her life and her relationship with Cyclops more and more difficult, which, funnily enough, doesn't sit well with Wolverine. Only he can disrupt that relationship. Okay? When Jean sacrificed herself, Cyclops and Emma Frost made their weird telepathic relationship thing a real official relationship really soon afterwards. Logan immediately found this disrespectful to Jean's memory, because it was. While it seems to be water under the bridge now, Logan isn't really the type of person to let things go, and it's still highly likely that he resents Emma for the pain that she helped cause someone he loves. Jean. Also, Logan has to still be holding on to at least a little bit of animosity against Emma Frost thanks to her past with the Hellfire Club. In a more recent comic, Wolverine even comments on the fact that he and Emma wouldn't ever consider each other friends, but they're civil. So maybe hate isn't the right word, but it's not completely wrong either. Number 4, Venom. James Howlett and Eddie Brock have a lot in common. Both have bonded with the Clintar symbiote known as Venom, both are incredibly popular anti-heroes known for brutal tactics when dispatching evil. Wolverine and Venom have also crossed paths and fought on more than one occasion. The Claws and Webs story, Venom, Tooth and Claw, 2018's Venom Annual number 1, and Wolverine Exit Wounds number 1 all show us examples of these two anti-heroes coming to blows. And more often than not, despite the physical strength disadvantage, Wolverine usually comes out on top, usually humiliating Venom. But at the same time, while it might seem like Wolverine and Venom despise each other given the number of times they fought, it was recently revealed in a Venom annual that Eddie Brock owes Logan for putting him on the path towards becoming an anti-hero. The issue flashed back to one of the earliest meetings between the two after Wolverine had taken victory over Venom. Logan relates how Professor Charles Xavier once gave a monster like him a chance to be better, and that he was now giving Venom the same thing, which helped to kickstart the anti-hero thing. So maybe they don't actually hate each other, but probably a little bit. Just a little smidge. Number 3, Deadpool. Look, these two may have worked together countless times in Weapon X and on X-Force, but that doesn't mean the Merc with the Mouth is a huge fan of Wolverine. Deadpool probably hates Wolverine more than anyone else on this list, but it's not for the same reason as anyone else here. It's actually because of jealousy. And in my eyes, I think that's born out of admiration, so if anything, maybe Deadpool actually loves Wolverine. But how do I know this? Well, in one storyline during Daniel Way's run, the two spent 3 or 4 issues trying to take one another off of the board, and that isn't necessarily out of character for either of them. But it was after Wade captured Wolverine that he starts to talk, revealing how much he actually hates the guy. Wade secretly feels that most people see him as just a poor man's version of Wolverine, so he continually has to prove that he's not that, but something better. Deadpool is one of those characters that we rarely see be serious, but this time, I actually kind of felt it. I think he was serious. Number 2, Beast. For the longest time, I actually thought Beast was one of the better heroes out there, but that's because I didn't know Beast apparently. Beast is a Dr. Hank McCoy is one of the 8 smartest people in the world, and being smart in comic books seems to be a pretty easy path to being morally dubious. Don't get me wrong, Wolverine isn't a Boy Scout by any stretch of the imagination, but he still holds his morals. Wolverine and Beast were actually friends. Beast stuck with Wolverine during the Schism event, and he was also on the side of the Avengers with Wolverine during the Avengers vs. X-Men. But despite that, in order to deal with external threats to the new mutant nation of Krakoa, Beast has taken a position as the chief of the intelligence agency X-Force, which has almost completely cost him his morality. McCoy has chosen some questionably authoritarian actions to guarantee the Krakoan sovereignty, like sabotaging the country of Terra Verde, squirreling away funds to open a space station prison, and interrupting one of Wolverine's resurrections to attach an obedience collar to send Wolverine on clandestine operations, all of which was kept secret from the rest of X-Force. This ticked off Wolverine, which in turn ticked off Beast even more. Beast sent Wolverine on a mission so that he would be captured for an auction that Hank attended, and then he literally showed Wolverine to the afterlife in order to resurrect Logan again in a primitive state and turn him into Weapon X. Then Beast sent him on more missions. Beast has become a literal villain, and he just keeps getting worse and worse as time goes on. But finally, in at number 1, Spider-Man. I can't lie, it's really fun to see Spider-Man and Wolverine work together, because you've got one of the most quippy, lighthearted, inspiring, and morally positive heroes teamed up with one of the most grumpy heroes in the Marvel landscape. The thing here is that while these two may clash, they are almost like brothers. I think of it like Wolverine as a big brother and Spider-Man as a little brother. Spider-Man and his snarky ways has a knack for getting under the skin of Wolverine's short temper. Well, he hits on MJ, and he's a little too stabby for Peter Parker's no-killing preferences. They've clashed a few times, but one takes the cake. It should be obvious, but you don't ever dare insult Mary Jane Watson to Peter Parker's face. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 522, Peter is awoken with a call about a newspaper article claiming that Mary Jane has an entanglement with Tony Stark. It's not true, obviously, at all, and actually it's a setup by a different villain, but Peter gets out of his bed in Avengers Tower and goes looking for his wife. Along the way, he runs into Wolverine in a room with a very lovely high-up view of the city. Now, Logan decides to start going on about how Mary Jane messed up big time, and after a warning from Peter to stop, he decides to not do that and comments on her lack of brains. This lovely little comment gets Wolverine tossed through unbreakable glass from the penthouse level of Avengers Tower without so much as a second thought from Peter Parker, and it's great.
Number 10, Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan is one of Wolverine's most famous stories, and it was part of the inspiration for the 2017 film Logan. Now, in the comic, Logan ends up killing the X-Men. Now, it's not really his fault. He was tricked into doing this evil thing by none other than Mysterio, and this ends up scarring Wolverine, and he ends up going into exile and vows never to use his claws again. But he does, and it's pretty darn epic when he does. Number 9, Wolverine Goes to Hell. This one comes from the Wolverine Goes to Hell storyline. Logan is sent to Hell where he's forced to confront villains from his past, but his body is possessed by a demon. That demon decides to use Wolverine's body and go on a rampage and kill a ton of people. Wolverine, or as he's later called, Wolverine, ends up fighting the X-Men and nearly kills all of them. They eventually end up stopping him with the help of Ghost Rider and Damian Hellstrom. Number 8. Zombie Wolverine. Back in 2005, Marvel launched a limited series based on an alternate Earth. On this Earth, the whole Marvel universe becomes infected by a zombie virus. Of course, one of those heroes being Wolverine. Because of this, they end up killing and wiping out life on the planet. Again, not entirely his fault, but zombie Wolverine is evil, so that is why he's on the list. Also, how cool was it to see all the Marvel heroes as zombies? Apparently, we are going to get some kind of version of this in Marvel's What If animated show, which could be really cool if it's done right. Also, it leads perfectly into number 7. Hydra Wolverine. This version of Wolverine comes from Marvel's What If series. It's called Enemy of the State. Now, in the original version, Hydra controls Wolverine and tries to get him to wipe out all the other heroes, but they manage to stop him and get it back to normal. In the What If version, it doesn't work out that way. He ends up wiping out a ton of heroes because they couldn't save him. It's pretty crazy seeing Wolverine kill a bunch of Marvel's most famous heroes, but luckily it didn't actually happen like that because that would just be super, super depressing. Number 6. Wolverine and the X-Force. In this story, Cyclops tasks Wolverine with creating a new X-Force team to basically do all the jobs that, the X-Men couldn't do. And oh, he does. Oh boy, he definitely does. He recruits Archangel, Deadpool, Phantom X, and Psylocke, who are known to kill, every now and then. But when Cyclops isn't happy about how they're operating, they become a super secret Black Ops team, which led into the Uncanny X-Force. And it got really dark, where they killed a lot of people. I mean, I know Wolverine kills, but it just seemed really different this time. Number 5, Savage Wolverine. Wolverine's relationship with the Hulk is pretty rocky. Everyone knows that. They fight all the time, and for the most part, they just don't get along. But sometimes Wolverine takes it a little too far. Usually the two of them can at least see eye to eye, but there are some moments in the comics where Wolverine just completely took things to another level. In Savage Wolverine number 5, Wolverine and his friends are attacked by a giant gorilla. Hulk shows up and is actually just gonna help, but then Wolverine does something so crazy. He stabs Hulk in the head. I mean, Hulk wasn't even doing anything. Wolverine just straight up stabbed him for no reason. Poor Hulk, he just can't catch a break. I mean, I know he's super strong, but adamantium claws to the head will hurt no matter who you are. Number 4. Wolverine the Vampire. In the What If series, Wolverine has become an evil vampire twice. Once in What If issue number 6, and once in What If issue number 24. In issue number 6, he becomes a vampire and kills almost every hero on Earth. In issue number 24, Dracula turns him into a vampire, and then Wolverine kills Dracula and becomes the new king of the vampires. He then goes on to kill a ton of heroes, yet again, and drinks their blood, which is kind of gross. He turns good eventually after Kitty Pryde dies, and then he ends up releasing a spell that kills all the vampires. Number 3, Wolverine kills his son. So Wolverine has a son, Daken, who was raised with the sole purpose of killing Wolverine. He was a member of the Dark Avengers and generally just not a nice dude. Long story short, Wolverine ended up killing him by drowning him in a puddle. I mean, even if he was super evil, it just isn't a good look when a father kills a son like that. Number 2, Ultimate Wolverine murders a kid. The Ultimate Universe was a bit of a mixed bag. When it started with Ultimate Spider-Man, it was so fresh and exciting, with many fans excited to see where this new universe would take their favorite characters. And there was a lot of cool stories, but sometimes they made some heroes just look slightly evil, specifically Wolverine. At one point in the Ultimate Comics, a young kid develops mutant abilities, but not the kind you would hope for. You see, he accidentally killed a ton of people in his town by lighting them on fire, because he didn't really know what was happening or how to control his newfound abilities. After the incident, he ended up running away and hiding. Wolverine eventually tracks him down and explains what's happening to him and how he kind of put every other mutant in a bad light. So Wolverine ends up killing the kid and leaving him in a cave. Like, that's just really dark, especially because the kid had no idea what was happening. And Wolverine killed him because it made mutants look bad. It's kind of weird. Number 1, Horseman of Death. At one point in the comics, Apocalypse turned Wolverine into one of his 4 horsemen, the Horseman of Death. While he was the Horseman of Death, Wolverine attacks his fellow X-Men and tries to kill them. There's also an alternate version of Wolverine from another timeline, which is called Weapon X, where he became a celestial enhanced being and basically became the new Apocalypse. He even turned Jean into his own Horseman of Death. Oh, and he eventually called himself Weapon Omega. Yeah, he was pretty freaking creepy.
Number 10. kills. One of the worst things about Wolverine in general, but also maybe one of the best things, is that he kills. Or more now that he's willing to kill, I guess. Although back in the day, he really did kill pretty indiscriminately. And like I said, it was basically what made him one of the worst, while also being the best at what he does. Although, as Wolverine has even said himself, what he does isn't usually very nice. Now Wolverine is more reserved to maiming those he comes up against, only really killing those who he feels really deserve it, who are beyond redemption. But even then, the fact that Wolverine thinks he gets to decide those folks' fate could be seen as, well, pretty problematic. I mean, Wolverine's a pretty good dude all around, but I still don't think, even as a hero, that he should get the judgment call on who lives and who dies. You know what I mean? Though it definitely makes him a way more complex and interesting character. I will say that, so it is good in that way. Number 9. Almost killed an innocent. During his first long-running Wolverine series, Wolverine at one point must face off against Lady Deathstrike. The first time around that this happens in the series is back in the past, after Wolverine has seemingly traveled back in time via a picture. It makes a lot more sense if you read the story, but it's basically what happens. While attempting to escape Lady Deathstrike and defeat the German World War II soldiers who have infiltrated the part of Spain Wolverine is in, he and the rebels are faced with the decision of what to do with a young prisoner who has seen too much and could cause them to be captured if he's forced to talk. Prisoner's name is Jamie, by the way. I didn't write that down, but I know that, just in case you're wondering. One of the options on the table is to simply take out the prisoner Jamie, but because of his age, Wolverine ultimately helps to let the boy go and set him free. However, for a small moment there, it is implied that Wolverine has basically made the other choice and decided to kill the prisoner rather than let him walk free, with a promise that he won't tell anyone what he has seen or heard about where the rebels are headed. It's a very shocking moment where you're like, wait, did that just happen? Don't worry, it didn't happen. Oh, it only almost happened. The notion was entertained, and that I think is still pretty bad. Number 8. Relationship with Squirrel Girl. Wolverine's relationship with Squirrel Girl, as was established in New Avengers, might be considered by some to be one of the worst things he's ever done, or that was ever done to him as a character, I guess. This is likely because Squirrel Girl, aka Doreen Green, is often depicted as being from a different generation entirely than Wolverine, and that's not even considering that he's actually even older than he appears and than the generation that he first appeared in. Squirrel Girl and Wolverine were implied to have had a romantic relationship in the 2010 New Avengers series in issue number 7, and many consider it to be pretty odd. And I gotta say, the way it's also kind of weirdly like shoehorned in there, you're like, what? Why is this in here? What purpose narratively does this really give us? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Wolverine, then be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Goodness knows he's done a lot of bad things. Even Wolverine would say that though. He'd be like, I got a lot of things in my closet. I got a lot of skeletons in my closet, bub. Number 7. Killed Jean Grey. Wolverine has done this on multiple occasions, and in one instance, kinda killed Jean on repeat, stuck on a loop of death after she refused to stay dead thanks to the resurrection powers of the Phoenix Force. Initially, Wolverine killed Jean out of mercy to save her from a gruesome death, burning up as they were in a space shuttle that was rapidly getting closer and closer to the sun. However, this death was actually quite helpful, as it allowed Jean to at least regenerate, unlocking her full potential as the Phoenix, which meant that she could actually then save them, so yay! And surprisingly, she also wasn't even mad about Wolverine killing her. Bonus! I'd be pretty mad, to be honest. I'd be like, wow, you just killed me. That's pretty shady, man. But I guess when you're like, but you unlocked my full potential, it's like, well, alright. Shortly thereafter, Jean would be killed permanently by Magneto, but years later would return again, only to have Wolverine, afraid of the potential of Dark Phoenix, along with the rest of the X-Men, kill her on repeat for a while by stabbing her through with his claws until he realized this wasn't exactly having the same effect that he'd hoped, as the Phoenix Force basically just kept rezzing Jean, so it doesn't always work out. Still, that's a lot of Jean deaths. That is, I think, at least 9 Jean deaths total. I think 8 stabbies the one time, 1 stabby the other time. A lot of deaths. A lot of deaths without any actual death, actually, now that I think about it. Number 6. Got even with the Punisher. So the Punisher has done some pretty heinous things to Wolverine over the years in their ongoing fight for who can be the most edgy. This has less to do with Wolverine and Punisher feuding within the comics, and more to do with shots being fired between a few of their passionate writers, Wolverine's Frank Thierry and Punisher's Garth Ennis. Now granted, Thierry has also written a few Punisher titles in his time, although I don't think Ennis has ever written a Wolverine titled book, at least not as far as I know, which is surprising to me. But anyways, I digress. In Thierry's 2003 issue of Wolverine, issue 186, Thierry ended up aiming to get revenge on the Punisher for what Garth Ennis had him do in 2002 during his Marvel Knights run on Punisher in issue number 17. Ennis had Punisher brutally attack and maim Wolverine, basically, even going so far as to steamroll him, and some other things, which I don't know if I can even say on YouTube, but they were bad. To get revenge, Thierry had Wolverine imply the Punisher was gay. Doesn't sound so bad until you read it and you see how it's presented, with Logan implying the Punisher is basically lesser or less of a man or a hero because of his possible sexual orientation. Yikes. Maybe don't do that. Maybe don't write that. It's unfortunate because now that's also on Wolverine as a character. Eek. Number 5. Actually killed innocents. Other than Jamie, who Wolverine seemingly almost had killed but then ultimately did not have killed, and the countless other baddies that Wolverine has faced and defeated over the years, there are also other youngsters that Wolverine has been forced to take down. One of the worst moments where Wolverine has been forced to eliminate a youth happens actually outside of the main continuity in the Ultimate Universe, the reality of Earth 1610. Here, Wolverine is sent on a mission to do the X-Men's dirty work by taking out a young mutant who threatens the very rights mutants are basically fighting for. The sad part, really isn't this kid's fault. His mutant power simply manifested without him knowing and caused him to accidentally vaporize the entire residents of his town, including seemingly his high school crush or his girlfriend or sweetheart and his parents. So really feels pretty bad, and you're like, wow, Wolverine, really, wow, that's what you're doing? But he's like, hey, I gotta protect the mutants or something by killing a mutant or something. Seems a little shady, the reasoning there. Number 4. Became Apocalypse. Of course, this one also did not happen in the main continuity, but hey, it still happened, so it still counts. This all went down in Age of Apocalypse, where Wolverine, here known as Weapon X, would fight against Apocalypse for most of his life. At one point, he was part of Magneto's X-Men, but would leave them to rescue Jean Grey, his love, and later his wife, and fight alongside her against Apocalypse in their own way. Eventually, however, Jean was believed to have been killed and Weapon X would become a recluse, only to find out years later that she was actually alive. Dun dun dun. When the Celestials returned to Earth following the death of Apocalypse, James Howlett offered himself to the Celestials in order to prevent the destruction of Earth. However, this caused him to become the very villain he had hated the most, as the Celestials used tech to modify him, giving him great power but basically warping his mind, and causing him to become Apocalypse's heir, known as Weapon Omega. He was basically just like, evolution is what it's all about, baby. People were like, but don't you see? You're Apocalypse now. And he's like, but it's different. I'm trying to save people by killing people. Wait a minute, maybe you're right. Number 3. Killed the Mongrels. These last few spots are definitely all competitors for the number 1 spot on this list in my opinion. This one is especially bad because the Mongrels were actually Wolverine's children, although he didn't know it at the time that he was forced to fight them. They were rounded up by his known son with Itsu, Daken. Daken was working with the Red Right Hand, a group who had a personal vendetta against Wolverine. Daken created the team known as the Mongrels, not even really to defeat Wolverine, despite Daken having trained them himself. It was kind of like a win-win situation for him. Either Wolverine would be killed by the children he didn't know or had forgotten he'd sired over the years, or Wolverine would end up killing them all. The latter was kind of how it went down, and when Wolverine learned that the members of the Mongrels had actually all been his children, and he didn't know that, he was pretty heartbroken. So I guess point 1 for Red Right Hand and Daken. Only sad points for Wolverine. No points for the Mongrels because they died. Number 2. Made moves on MJ. So this one is so awful, it of course cannot come from the main canon of Earth 616. Instead, this point comes to us from the alternate reality of Earth 1610, also known as the Ultimate Universe. After Wolverine had she attempted to get back at him by making him telepathically swap bodies with the person he hated the most, which ended up being Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. Although Jean later says, oh sorry, I didn't know this would happen to you, Peter. Oops. But anyways, while swapped, both heroes struggle to deal with the everyday while occupying each other's bodies. However, Wolverine still manages to find some time to put some moves on MJ. Well, they don't seal the deal. This is really messed up because Mary Jane at this point in time is a teenager and she didn't even know that Peter and Logan had swapped bodies, so she thought that it was just Peter looking for some action instead of the super old at this point thanks to his healing factor X-Men hero, Wolverine. Although not a very heroic moment here, Wolverine. What you doing? Don't do that. Number 1. Kill Daken. I think one of the worst things you can do as a parent is to kill those you're supposed to be looking out for and taking care of and protecting, even if your son happens to be the often villainous Daken, now commonly referred to by his actual birth/human name, Akihiro. At one point, Wolverine was forced to put down Akihiro during a fight. Akihiro had held a grudge against his old man for years, having been trained by Romulus to hate Logan after being stolen from his mother's womb and raised by Romulus. For years, Wolverine thought his son was dead, not knowing to come searching for Akihiro. But Akihiro was raised to believe he was basically abandoned, and he also grew up in a household where people didn't like him because he was half Japanese and half Canadian, so that was another issue. Thanks to some plotting from the devious and diabolical mind of Victor Creed, aka Wolverine's nemesis Sabretooth, Wolverine was forced into a death match with Daken, a match that ended with Wolverine killing Akihiro, drowning him in a puddle, while sadly thinking of what could have been had Akihiro been given a chance at a semi-normal life, being raised by Wolverine and of course his now deceased mother Itsu. What would it have been like if their life had been happy? We'll never know because he gets drowned in a puddle. But don't worry, Akihiro's alive and well now, so it all fixed itself. And now he and Wolverine are on great terms, so never mind, I guess.